So today we are dealing with biomechanics of tooth movement. So this is again an extremely important topic, but most students find it a complicated topic. But I assure you that once you understand the basics of the biomechanics of tooth movement, it will be like an easy cakewalk for you people. So don't try to mug up anything in this chapter. Just understand and go through the concepts in this chapter. So if you have a common understand what is really going on, the basic elementary physics and the principles which are involved in the tooth movement, it will be easier for you. So please try to learn the topic in such a manner. Don't try to mug up or by heart or anything. Just go through all the slides. I have included most of the important diagrams and charts from Profit textbook, as well as you can refer Balaji. So please go through the pictures. These pictures are extremely important in this chapter, that helps you easily understand the basic biomechanics in the tooth movement. It's actually an interplay between your elementary physics, what you have learned in your school, as well as a little bit of common sense. So it's also called as a common sense mechanics in tooth movement. So let's begin. So when you begin with biomechanics of tooth movement, first of all what we have to learn is about the force in orthodontics. So whatever be the malocclusion, it is the amount of the force or the duration of the force that is being applied which produces or affects a result in orthodontics. So we will see about the different types of forces that is being used in orthodontics. The first one is the continuous force. So continuous force is one which actually decreases little in magnitude between two appointment periods. So please look at the picture in the graph. You can see that initially you have applied a force, it gradually gets reduced to a minimum level, but then on further activation it is again coming back to the initial level of the force, and then over a period of other activation it gradually gets reduced. So there is a force actually that decreases little in magnitude between appointment periods, but there is always an amount of force that is being continuously delivered. So this is the type of continuous force, and it is usually your fixed appliances which makes use of light wire appliances, light wire, arch wires. So these appliances are which provide continuous forces. Now let's talk about interrupted forces. So interrupted forces are one in which we apply a force, and then after a period of time it gradually gets reduced to zero. See, that graph is touching a zero, and in between the next activation there is a period when which there is no force is acting on the person. So it's an orthodontic or orthopedic force that is inactive for intervals of time between appointments. So a force exerted by an extraoral appliances like your headgear, which is actually worn only during 10 to 12 hours during a period, that is the kind of interrupted forces that is being delivered. So whenever you are when you ask a child to wear a headgear for 10 to 12 hours continuously, that time one force is being applied which gradually gets reduced, but then upon the removal of the appliances that force is not there for a time period, and after that again when the patient puts on the headgear or chin cup, that force is activated from the beginning, and then it gradually gets reduced. Again there is a period during which there is no force acting on the person. So it's the extraoral appliances that are worn during a particular period. That's an example for interrupted forces. Now coming to intermittent forces. So intermittent force is an active orthodontic force that decays to zero magnitude or nearly zero magnitude between two appointments. So the examples are your removable active plates. When you give a Hollis plate with springs or something, then the force is gradually getting reduced to zero, and then or nearly zero between the next appointment. So once you put an appliance and then you ask the patient to come for activation next month, so by the time of the period the patient comes for next activation, the force exerted by that removable appliance is almost reduced to zero or nearly zero. So please note the difference: interrupted force, intermittent force, and continuous force. Continuous force is one in which there is a gradual reduction in the force, but it is not touching the zero value. There is always a force acting on the patient, always. That is what fixed orthodontic lightweight appliances are delivering. Whereas intermittent forces, which are delivered by your removable appliances, there is a period by the end of the next activation that the force will get reduced to zero or almost to zero. So that is the intermittent forces. And interrupted forces are those exerted by extraoral appliances during that is like there is a time period which there is no force acting on the person, but when he is putting back the appliances, it is again starting from the beginning. So now let's look at the changes. We have seen what are the types of the forces which are used in orthodontics: continuous forces, intermittent forces, interrupted forces. Now let's talk about the effects produced by light pressure and heavy pressure. So in orthodontics, it is the amount of the force and the duration of the force which is important, not like not always the magnitude of the force. It is the amount of the force and also the duration to which this force is being applied, which is extremely important in orthodontics. So we can either, when you are giving an appliance to a patient, you can go for light pressure or heavy pressure. So let's see what are the histological changes brought about by this light pressure as well as heavy pressure. So when you apply a pressure through an orthodontic appliances, what happens is that within less than 1 second, the PDF fluid will get incompressible, the alveolar bond will bend, and piezoelectric signals are generated. So your periodontal fluid is incompressible when any force is applied for less than 1 second. So what happens is that the alveolar bond will bend and piezoelectric signals will be generated. But during 1 to 2 seconds, then the periodontal fluid will get expressed. So less than 1 second, there is no periodontal fluid is not at all reacting. It is the alveolar bond is bending. But if the force is applied for more than 1 second, within 1 to 2 seconds, the periodontal fluid will get compressed. Tooth will move within the periodontal space. So if the light pressure is continuously applied for more than 2 seconds, like say for 3 to 5 seconds, then what happens is that the blood vessels within the periodontal ligament will get partially compressed on the pressure side, and on the tension side these blood vessels will get dilated. So also the periodontal fibers and the cells are mechanically distorted. So we were talking about what happens when whatever be the force, whether it is light force or heavy force, when it is applied for less than 1 second and when it is applied for 1 to 2 seconds. So within less than 1 second, piezoelectric signals will be generated, but within 1 to 2 seconds your periodontal fluid will get expressed and the tooth will move within the periodontal space. Now we were talking about what happens when light pressure is applied for 3 to 5 seconds. We talked about the blood vessels getting compressed on the pressure side and dilated on the tension side. Now if this light pressure is maintained for a few minutes, then what happens is that the blood flow will be getting altered, then oxygen tensions begins to change and prostaglandins and cytokines will get released. So we are talking about what happens when the light pressure is maintained for few minutes. So within few minutes the biochemical reaction begins, that is the blood flow will get altered, because we have seen the blood vessels are getting compressed on the pressure side and dilated on the tension side. So the blood flow will get altered. Now when the blood flow is altered, then the oxygen supply also changes and the oxygen tension changes. So this changes in blood flow and oxygen supply causes the release of chemicals, prostaglandins and cytokines. Now within few hours, the metabolic changes will occur, and the chemical messengers, that is the prostaglandin and cytokines that has been released, they will cause changes in the cellular activity, and enzymes levels also changes. So please note, within few 3 to 5 seconds, first your blood vessels were getting distorted. Now that affects your oxygen tension and the release of chemicals within few minutes. So within few minutes the blood flow is affected, oxygen tension changes, and prostaglandins and cytokines are released, and within hours this release of this chemical messengers will affect the cellular activity. Now within 4 hours, more than 4 hours, there will be increased cyclic AMP level, that is your chemical activity, chemical messengers and your cellular activity is getting altered. So there will be increased cyclic AMP levels which are detectable, and also there will be differentiation of the cells within the periodontal ligament. So this is happening within 4 hours. So we have seen what happens when a light pressure is applied to a tooth till 4 hours of time period. So by the time of 4 hours there will be increased cyclic AMP levels and cellular differentiation is beginning. Now coming to after 48 hours or 2 days, when a light pressure is applied, the tooth movement will begin, because there will be bone remodeling of the socket by the osteoclast as well as osteoblast. So please note that here, when a light pressure is applied, only after 2 days or 48 hours the tooth movement is beginning, and there is the resorption of the remodeling of the bony socket by osteoclast as well as osteoblast. Now coming to what happens, what all biological changes are happening in the periodontal ligament when a heavy pressure is applied. So when a heavy pressure is applied, after 3 to 5 seconds, the blood vessels are occluded on the pressure side. So please note this difference. Previously, when we were discussing, when light pressure is applied, after 3 to 5 seconds, there is compression of the blood vessels on the pressure side and there is dilation of the blood vessels on the tension side. But when heavy pressure is applied, after 3 to 5 seconds, there is occlusion of the blood vessels within the periodontal ligament on the pressure side. So the blood vessels, when they are completely occluded, the blood flow will be cut off, and within minutes and hours there will be cell death in the compressed area. So within hours there is cell death in the compressed area, because the blood supply is cut off to the compressed periodontal ligament area. Now when the blood supply is cut off and the cell death occurs, this necrotic area will become like a hyalinized zone, because histologically it gives that appearance of an hyalinized zone. So this zone is referred to as hyalinized zone. There is no hyaline tissue present in that zone as such, but it gives histologically a hyalinized zone appearance. So this is happening after few hours of heavy pressure. Now what happens is that when the zone gets hyalinized or necrotic, it remains like that for 3 to 5 days, and after 3 to 5 days there will be cell differentiation in the adjacent bone marrow spaces. So from the adjacent bone marrow spaces, the osteoclast will start resorption or remodeling of this hyalinized area, and this is happening beneath the lamina dura of the adjacent bone marrow spaces. That is, hence it is called as undermining resorption. So because it is beginning beneath or under the necrotic area, it is called as undermining resorption. And after 1 to 2 weeks, that is 7 to 14 days, this undermining resorptions removes the lamina dura adjacent to this compressed periodontal ligament. So the undermining resorption will take at least 2 weeks to completely remove the necrotic area or the hyalinized zone, and after this only the tooth movement is happening. So it is taking at least 7 to 14 days for tooth movement to begin when a heavy pressure is applied, whereas when a light pressure is applied, the tooth movement is beginning within 2 days. So it is a common misconception that when heavy force is applied, rapid tooth movement will begin. It's not like that. It is taking more time when a heavy pressure is applied, because there is hyalinization and then there is undermining resorption, both of which will delay the tooth movement. So it is taking at least 7 to 14 days for the tooth movement to begin when a heavy pressure is applied, whereas when a light pressure is applied, after 2 days the tooth movement is beginning. beginning, and it is frontal resorption which is happening in the light pressure applied areas where there is osteoclasts will appear and they resorb the or remodel the bony socket. Whereas in heavy pressure area there is a formation of a hyalinized zone, and the resorption is undermining resorption because the osteoclast has to differentiate in the nearby areas, and then they will start invading the necrotic zone beneath the necrotic zone. So hence it is an undermining resorption, and both this hyalinization and undermining resorption delays the tooth movement, and the tooth movement is happening only after 7 to 14 days in case of heavy pressure. So please note the histological differences which are happening in when a light pressure is applied and when a heavy pressure is applied. So these are extremely important, and this forms the biological basis of the orthodontic therapy. So Burstone has classified the phases of tooth movement into 3 categories. The first one is your initial phase. So initial phase is happening within the 1 to 3 days. So both the light force as well as the heavy force will displace the tooth to a same extent during this initial force. So please note at the figure there is an initial spike in the graph which is showing rapid displacement of the teeth within the periodontal space, and there might be a bending of the alveolar bone which is happening during the first to 3 days, but this rapid peak or tooth movement is gradually getting declined and it comes to a stagnated level as we can see in the graph. So the initial phase is characterized by rapid tooth movement over a short distance, and then it gradually stops, and this is due to the displacement of the teeth in the periodontal membrane space, and there might be a bending of the alveolar bone. So the tooth movement in this initial phase is up to 0.4 to 0.9 millimeters, and this is happening within 1 to 3 days of time. Now, if there is a heavy force being applied to a tooth, you can have a second phase which is the lag phase, and this lag phase is characterized by the formation of the hyalinized zone as well as the undermining resorption. So this hyalinization and undermining resorption actually delays the tooth movement because there requires a revascularization, or there might be increased time period required to remove the hyalinized or avascular area of necrotic bone. So on the contrary belief that when heavy force is applied, you expect that there will be faster tooth movement, but it's not like that. On the contrary, heavy force actually delays the tooth movement because hyalinization and this undermining resorption requires more time than the normal frontal resorption that commonly occurs associated with the light forces. So this lag phase is characterized by little or no tooth movement, and if the duration of the lag phase depends on the amount of the force is used to move the tooth. So this usually extends for 2 to 10 weeks, and the duration depends on the variety of factors like the density of the alveolar bone, age of the patient, and the extent of the hyalinized tissue. Now coming to post-lag phase or progressive tooth movement phase. So this is the phase when there is the frontal resorption is happening. So if you are applying a light force, then there will be only 2 phases, that is your initial phase, and then you gradually move to the post-lag phase or progressive tooth movement phase. But if you are applying a heavy force, then there will be an initial phase and there will be a lag phase and there will be a post-lag phase or progressive tooth movement phase. So what happens in orthodontics is that whatever force you are applying, it is unavoidable that some heavy pressure might be felt to the periodontal ligament. So most commonly the tooth movement is characterized by all these 3 phases, where there is the initial phase where rapid displacement of the tooth in the periodontal ligament is happening, and there is an undermining resorption phase where there is hyalinization and undermining resorption happening, and that is your lag phase, and finally the progressive tooth movement phase or your post lag phase where there is frontal resorption is occurring. And during this frontal resorption phase, osteoclasts are found over a large surface area, resulting in the direct resorption of the bony surface, and there will be tooth movement. So Burstone has classified the phases of tooth movement into 3 phases. Your first phase is your initial phase, occurring for a period of 1 to 3 days. The second phase is your lag phase, which may extend up to 2 to 10 weeks, and this is an undesirable phase. This is a no tooth movement phase, and the factors influencing the extent of the lag phase are the amount of the force applied, the density of the alveolar bond, the age of the patient, and the extent of the hyalinized tissues. And finally, your third phase is the progressive tooth movement or post lag phase, when there is frontal resorption is happening due to the osteoclast, which is found over the large surface area of the tooth. Now, when we are talking about biomechanics, we have to understand certain mechanical points in a tooth structure. So first we will see what is a center of resistance. So center of the resistance, which is denoted as CRES, it is the point at which the resistance to tooth movement is concentrated. So please look at the picture where it is marked as center of resistance. It is the point at which the resistance to tooth movement is concentrated, and it is approximately midpoint of the embedded portion of the root. So whatever root structure remains within the bony socket or within the alveolar bond, it is at the approximate midpoint of this embedded portion the center of resistance is located. So as the bond level changes, the center of resistance will also changes. Now coming to what is center of mass. So center of mass is like every body has a point in its mass which behave as if the whole mass is concentrated at that single point. So this point is referred to as center of mass. Now coming to center of gravity. So center of gravity is the center of mass of a object when it is an environment in which where gravity is present. So usually for a free object, the center of mass is a point at which the whole mass will be concentrated at that point. That is, there is a particular point which behaves as if the whole mass is concentrated at that point. And when this object is placed in an environment when there is a gravity, then this point becomes the center of gravity. Now one more important terminology is the center of rotation, which is denoted as CROT. So this is a fixed point around which a two-dimensional figure appears to be rotated as determined from its initial and final position. So it's a point around which a tooth rotates. So please note this picture. You can see the initial position of the tooth being noted in a black line, like a shadow like line. Then there is a final position, retroclined position of the tooth. So when the long axis of these teeth are considered in its initial position and the final position, where the point at which these two lines bisect, that is just center of rotation, center of rotation. So it is around this point that the tooth rotates and changes its position from its initial point, proclined point, to its retroclined point, as seen in this figure. If it is the reverse also, the same will happen. So it is determined, the center of rotation is determined by drawing the long axis of this tooth from its initial position and then its final position, and the point at which these two lines will intersect will give you your center of rotation. So we have seen center of resistance and center of rotation. Now we will talk about the type of tooth movement. So there can be different types of tooth movement, which is depends upon where your force is applied with respect to your center of resistance and center of rotation. So first tooth movement we are discussing is tipping. Tipping is a very simple and most common type of tooth movement where the crown will move in the same direction of the force applied and root will move in the opposite direction of the force applied. So this tipping can be either controlled or uncontrolled tipping. So uncontrolled tipping is one in which the movement of a tooth occurs about a center of rotation which is apical to and very close to the center of resistance. So please look at the picture. We can see that the tipping is a common type of tooth movement where the crown will move in the same direction of the force being applied. So please look at the picture on the right hand side. There you can see the force is applied labially and the tooth will be moving in the same direction. The crown portion will be moving in the same direction as the force being applied. So force is applied from labial side trying to move the teeth lingually. So the crown portion is moving lingually, whereas the root portion is moving in the opposite direction. Now uncontrolled tipping is where the center of rotation will be apical and above, but it is always close to the center of resistance, and this is characterized by crown moving in one direction and the root will be moving in the opposite direction. So uncontrolled tipping is the most common when excessive force is applied and there is no control over the rotation of the tooth. Also, please note in the picture on the right hand side, you can see that there are some red areas which are marked as the area of the compression. So when the pressure is being applied on the tooth, the area of compression or the loading is happening at apically as well as coronally, and this is happening in a few particular point. It's actually happening only in a few area. So the pressure felt, or when the force is applied on the tooth, the pressure felt on that area will be larger because it is not distributed over a large area, it is just distributed at a very particular pointed locations. So please look at the loading diagram. You can see that it is happening only in the load is felt only in the apical region as well as the coronal region, and that too diagonally opposite regions, and the force is being concentrated in a very small area. So the area of compression is very small and hence the pressure felt on these regions will be very large, and that is detrimental to your periodontal ligament. Now there is one kind of tipping movement which is called as controlled tipping. So controlled tipping is one in which there is the movement of the crown in the same direction of the force being applied, but the movement of the root will be very minimal. So the crown will be moving in the same direction as the force being applied, but the root movement which is happening in the opposite direction of the force applied, that will be minimal. So this is called as controlled tipping, and here the center of rotation will be at the apex. It is at the apex the center of rotation is. So please look at the picture on the right side. You can see that the center of rotation is located at the apex for the controlled tipping, whereas for uncontrolled tipping the center of rotation was located above but very close to your center of resistance. But here the center of rotation will be located at the apex region. And also please look at the picture on the left side. You can see that the force being applied, the pressure is felt on the opposite side, opposite periodontal ligament region, but over a much more wider area. Please look at the red arrow marks which are denoted there. It is denoting the loading diagram. So the load is felt from apical to coronal on a large area, whereas in uncontrolled tipping the load was felt only in two small regions and hence the pressure felt on that points was very severe. But here the load is felt or load is distributed over a large area, so the pressure felt in the periodontal ligament will be less, and it is this kind of movement is less harmful to your tooth. Now after tipping, the next tooth movement we are discussing is torquing or root movement. So in root movement, the tooth's axial inclination is changed by moving only the root, whereas the crown is placed as stationary. So it is called as torquing or root movement because only the root is changing its position, whereas the crown is almost remaining stationary. So here the center of rotation is at the incisal edge. And please look at the picture on the right side. You can see the stress diagram. Here the stress is distributed over a larger area, but compared to controlled tipping, the stress is more greater at the apex. So please go back to your previous slide and you can see the difference. There the pressure was more felt coronally and the arrow was getting less in size as you move apically. Whereas in torquing, the stresses are great at the apical region of the root, and as it moves coronally, the arrows are getting smaller. But the pressure is here also distributed over a large area compared to your uncontrolled tipping. So torquing is basically your root is moving but your crown is remaining stationary, and here the center of rotation is at the incisal edge. So please look at the picture on the left side where the center of rotation is marked because only the root is moving. So the center of rotation will be located in the crown portion and it is located at your incisal edge. So we have seen tipping. Tipping is one in which crown will move in one direction and root will move in opposite direction. Now torquing is when the root is moving but the crown is remaining stationary. So what happens when a force is applied and both the crown and root are moving in the same direction as the force being applied? That is called as your translation or body movement. So this bodily movement to happen, the center of rotation should be at infinity and the line of force should be passing through the center of resistance of that tooth. So only when these two conditions are met, there will be a true translation or bodily movement of the tooth. So when the line of force passes through the center of resistance of an object, that tooth will move in the same direction. Both the root and the crown will move in the same direction as the force being applied, and here the center of rotation is at infinity. Now after tipping, torquing and your bodily movement, we will talking about two more tooth movements. One is your extrusion and the other one is intrusion. So now extrusion is when the tooth is displaced along its long axis in the occlusal direction. So please look at the picture on the right side which is marked as extrusion. Please note the arrow mark, yellow arrow mark, noting the tooth is being displaced along its long axis in the occlusal direction. Now that is your extrusive tooth movement and it is one of the easiest tooth movement to achieve. And there is no area of compression when the force being applied in case of an extrusion, but there is only an area of tension. So extrusion is one of the easiest tooth movement to achieve. There is displacement of the tooth along its long axis in the occlusal direction, and most importantly, only an area of tension is felt in the periodontal ligament. When an extrusive force is applied to the tooth, there is no area of compression. Now what happens in intrusion is diametrically opposite to that of extrusion. The tooth is getting displaced in the apical direction. So there is a bodily displacement of the tooth in the apical direction in case of intrusion. So please note that this is one of the most sensitive tooth movements, because as you can see in the picture on the left side where an intrusive force is given to a tooth, a very small apical area, only in a very small apical area, that loading is felt or a pressure is felt. Please look at the red marked area. That is the area where the load is felt. It is distributed over a very small area. So only a minimal force can be applied for intrusive kind of tooth movements, because otherwise the periodontium will be very much damaged, because the load felt is heavy. Since the force is applied only on a small area, if you apply too much force, then the pressure felt in the periodontal ligament will be too heavy, and that can cause damage to the periodontal ligament. So intrusion is one of a sensitive tooth movement, and only a very minimal force should be applied for intrusion, because the loading is felt only on a small area in the apex of the tooth. So we have seen what are the effects of the heavy force applied to on the tooth. So the amount of to force that is required to move the teeth in a desired direction rapidly with least damage to the tissues has been analyzed, and this is called as optimum orthodontic force. So that is the amount of force that moves the teeth most rapidly in the desired direction with least damage to the tissues. It's actually equivalent to your capillary pressure. According to Oppenheim and Schwarz, the optimum orthodontic force is equivalent to the capillary pressure, which is 20 to 26 grams per centimeter square. So we have seen the different types of tooth movement and also the loading areas on the periodontal ligament when each of this tooth movement is happening. So according to your loading area or amount of stress that being exerted on your periodontal ligament, the optimum orthodontic force for each of these tooth movement varies. So let's see what is the optimum orthodontic force for each of this tooth movement. For tipping, it is 35 to 60 grams. So for tipping, rotation and extrusion, so these are relatively one easiest tooth movements to achieve. So for these tooth movements, the amount of force is the same, that is 35 to 60 grams. Tipping, rotation and extrusion. Now bodily movement is actually when both the root and the crown are moving equivalent in the same direction. So it will be double of tipping. That is, when it was 35 to 60 grams for tipping, it is 70 to 120 grams for bodily movement. That is, double of the force that is required for tipping is needed for a bodily movement. Now coming to root uprighting or torquing movement, here the amount of force required is 50 to 100 grams. So always remember, tipping, rotation and extrusion are in need of optimum orthodontic force 35 to 60 grams, and bodily movement requires double the amount of optimum orthodontic force, which is 70 to 120 grams, and root uprighting is requiring 50 to 100 grams of force. And now of all these, the most important one is actually intrusion. We have when we were talking about intrusion, I have mentioned that the periodontium is extremely stressful when an intrusive tooth movement is applied. So it is the one which requires the minimum amount of force, that is 10 to 20 grams. So if you are given a few options, always remember that intrusion is the one which always requires the least amount of optimum orthodontic force. The maximum is required for bodily movement, which is the double that of the tipping, extrusion and rotation, that is 70 to 120 grams, whereas tipping, rotation and extrusion it is 35 to 60 grams, and for root uprighting it is 50 to 100 grams, and finally intrusion it is only 10 to 20 grams. So this chart is actually from Profit, so I prefer you have to learn these things, because they can ask you question, what's the optimum orthodontic force required for basically they can ask you like factually. They can give the magnitude of these forces, and they can ask which is the optimum orthodontic force required for any of this tooth movement, or else they can give you like multiple choice questions where the amount of force required for intrusion is more than extrusion, or they can give you questions like few options they can give you, like the amount of force required for rotation is same as that of tipping, amount of force required for rotation is less than that of tipping. So like that it seems quite confusing sometimes. So just go through these diagrams, go through this chart and understand that tipping, rotation and extrusion requires the same amount of force. Intrusion is the one which requires the least amount of the force, and why is it so? And bodily movement it requires double the amount of the force. So just go through the things and understand how it is correlated to your stresses on the periodontal ligament when these tooth movements are happening. So let's talk about moment and couple. So we all know that when the force is passing through the center of resistance of the body, then the body will be undergoing translation or bodily movement. But in case of a tooth, the center of resistance is not visible to us. When you are placing an orthodontic appliances, be it removable or fixed, the center of resistance is embedded within the alveolar bone, and we are placing the force not exactly at the center of resistance. Most of the time we are placing the force through brackets or appliances which are placed on the crown of a tooth. So the center of the force is being applied at a distance from the center of resistance. So such forces which are away from the center of resistance, it actually doesn't produce a bodily movement of the tooth, but rather it produces a tendency to rotate. So when you are applying a force at a distance away from the center of resistance, such forces have a tendency to produce the rotation of the object. So this is called as moment. And the moment is calculated by the magnitude of the product of the magnitude of the force and also the distance at which this is being applied. So moment is equal to force into distance. Now let's talk about couple. Couple is one when two equal and opposite non-collinear forces are acting on an object, then it is referred to as a couple. So the forces should be equal in magnitude but opposite in direction. So that will produce again a rotation of the tooth. So couple, please look at the picture. We can see that there are two forces, FA and FB, which are actually acting on the opposite directions, but they are of the equal magnitude. So one is being applied by a bracket placed on the buccal aspect, and the other is applied by an attachment placed on the lingual aspect. So this tooth is rotated. So when you apply a couple to such a tooth, it will get properly aligned. So we have seen about moment and couple. So now we are discussing about the clinical relevance of this moment and the counterbalancing couple. So we have already seen that we cannot directly apply the force to the center of resistance or center of rotation of any tooth, but we are placing the force through the attachments on the a coronal aspect of a tooth, so which is far away from your center of resistance. So invariably this will cause a moment. So this moment have a tendency to rotate the tooth, which is undesirable as far as orthodontist is concerned. So we require either a bodily movement, sometimes the torquing, sometimes the correction of the rotation, sometimes controlled tipping. So depending on the need or the type of the tooth movement required, we have to alter this moment created. That is, when we are applying a force, invariably there will be a moment created. So we have to minimize this moment so as to achieve the type of the movement that is required for us. So there are two methods of reducing this moment. One is like directly apply the force through the center of resistance, but that is not possible for us because center of resistance is mostly located within the alveolar bone. That is, it is located in the root portion of the tooth. So another method is to apply a counterbalancing force. Like if you are applying a force, that will cause a moment which causes a tendency to rotate. So to prevent this rotation, we are applying an equal and opposite force so that ultimately we can create a couple. So that couple prevents the rotation of the tooth, because two equal and opposite forces are acting, then they will tend to cancel out each other. Now this can be given by in orthodontics by giving attachments. Like you have seen, when you are seeing some ortho patients, you can see there will be some attachments to the brackets which is extending more close to the root. So through this attachment you can apply a force so as to prevent the the moment that is being created. Now the ratio between this force we are applying through the brackets and the counterbalancing force we are applying. So the force we are applying is denoted as MF. The moment that is created by the force we are applying is MF, and the opposite force we are applying, so that is called as a couple. So that opposing force we are applying, the moment created by it is called as MC. So the ratio between the force that is being applied and the counterbalancing couple that is being created. So the ratio of the moment between these two will determine the type of the tooth movement. So imagine in a scenario, the first scenario here is shown as on the left side. You can see there you are applying a force. There is no counterbalancing couple we are giving. We are simply applying a force like we are doing with removable appliances. You are keeping a Hollis retainer or a Hollis retraction plate and you are simply applying a force. There is no other attachments or no counterbalancing couple we are providing. So what happens is that your F is actually the force applied, but your MC, that is the counterbalancing couple, there is no counterbalancing couple, so it is 0. So the ratio between these two will be definitely 0. So that is when there is pure tipping, that is the tooth will rotate around the center of resistance of the teeth. So that is what happens when you are giving, mostly when you are giving a removable appliance. You are just simply applying a force. That force will produce a moment, that is MF will have some value, whereas there is no counterbalancing couple being given, and hence the moment created by that counterbalancing couple is 0. So 0 divided by anything will give you as 0. So this is when there is pure tipping. Now imagine the second scenario. The second scenario is where you are giving a counterbalancing couple, but the ratio between the counterbalancing couple and the force being applied, the moments created by these two, will be more than 0, because definitely you are giving a counterbalancing couple, but it will be less than 1. So what happens in such scenario is that you will get a controlled tipping. So that is your second scenario, where the ratio between the moment by the counterbalancing couple and moment by the force created is more than 0 and less than 1. So please look at this picture. When you see the second diagram, on the apical region, when there is one more counterbalancing couple we are giving, so hence there will be controlled tipping. So here the inclination of the tooth changes, but the center of rotation is displayed away from the center of resistance, and hence the root and the crown will move in the same direction. So here what is happening is that you are giving a counterbalancing couple which is of a small magnitude, and hence the ratio between the counterbalancing couple and the force is less than 1 but more than 0. So what happens is that as this ratio, the moment to force ratio increases, the center of rotation will be displaced away and away from the center of resistance, and hence we get a controlled tipping. Now coming to the third scenario. So the third scenario is when we are giving the exact amount of the force, equal amount of the force but in opposite direction. So imagine I am giving 50 grams of force through the bracket, and then as a counter I am placing another 50 grams of the force lingually. So buccally I am placing a bracket and applying 50 grams of force. Lingually I am placing another attachment and applying the same amount of force. So here the moment of the couple applied and the force, the ratio will be the same, because 50 grams I am applying buccally, 50 grams I am applying lingually. They tend to cancel out each other and the ratio is actually 1. In such cases you get the bodily movement of the teeth, that is there is equal movement of the crown and the root. So please note here, in the third picture you can see where MC by MF is equal to 1. Here the center of resistance is at infinity. The center of resistance is at infinity and the tooth is moving bodily. Please look at the apical region. You can see they are denoting the center of resistance to be at infinity. Now coming to the final scenario. The final scenario is when your counterbalancing couple is much greater than your a force being given. So in such cases the ratio between the counterbalancing couple and the force applied will be more than 1, and here the root will move more than the crown. So there will be a torquing tooth movement. So we have seen 4 scenarios. So whatever happens, like clinically this is relevant because it is the amount of the force applied and the amount of the couple we are trying to create. So the ratio between these two determines the type of the tooth movement. If we are simply applying a force and there is no provision for a counterbalancing force to be given, then there will be pure tipping movement. And if you are giving even a slight amount of counterbalancing couple but lesser than the force being applied, here the ratio between the couple and the force will be less than 1. Definitely greater than 0 because we are giving counterbalancing couple, but it will be less than 1. In such cases you will get a controlled tipping. Now the third scenario is when both the force applied and the counterbalancing force we are giving both are equal in magnitude. In such cases the ratio between MC and MF becomes 1, and there you will get your bodily movement. And in fourth scenario we are giving a counterbalancing couple which is much more in magnitude than the force being given. So the ratio becomes more than 1, and in such cases you will get torquing or root movement. So we have already seen what is a moment. It's the tendency of a force to produce a rotation. So this is happening when the brackets are positioned or the point of attachment of the forces are being at a distance from the center of resistance. So by altering this distance, we bring about a change in the moment to force ratios, and this is one of the mechanisms by which an orthodontist can bring about the changes in the tooth movement. Like if he needs a bodily movement or torquing, he can alter the positions of the brackets or the point of attachments and hence bring about the desired tooth movement. So we are considering 3 scenarios. So I prefer you please keep a paper and pen by your side so you can do the mathematical calculations by yourself. Now scenario number 1 is where which force is being applied. A force of 100 grams is being applied to a tooth. And here the bracket is positioned at a distance of 10 millimeters away from the center of resistance. So the moment of this force being applied is 100 into 10, that is 1000 gram millimeter. Now the force being applied is your 100 grams. So the ratio between the moment to force is 1000 by 100, that will give you a ratio of 10. So if the ratio of this force, moment to force ratio, if it is falling between 8 to 10, then there happens to be a bodily movement of the tooth. So if you want the bodily movement of the tooth, the force being applied, and the moment produced should be having a ratio of 8 to 10. Now the second scenario is one in which the same amount of force is being applied, 100 grams force is being applied, but the distance is getting reduced to 6 millimeters. Now the bracket is positioned more close to your center of resistance. So the bracket, when you're placing the brackets on a tooth, it is being placed more apically. So it is getting more close to your center of resistance. Now in this scenario, the moment will be 100 into 6, that is your 600 grams millimeter, and the ratio between moment to force will be 600 divided by 100, that will give you a ratio of 6. So if this force is this ratio is falling between 1 to 7, then we can bring about controlled tipping of the tooth. So if you want to bring about a controlled tipping of the tooth, what you do is you place the brackets a little bit more apically, that is it's more close to your center of resistance, because when we want a bodily movement, it was placed at a distance of 10 millimeters, whereas if you want a controlled tipping, then you are bringing the bracket more apically, that is closer to your center of resistance. Now the third scenario is again a force of 100 grams is being applied, but at a distance of 12 millimeters. Now the distance of it 12 millimeters, the moment to force ratio will be 1200 grams millimeter. Now the ratio between moment to force will be 1200 divided by 100, so it will give you 10. So if the ratio is more than 10, it will brings about torquing moments or root moments. So please remember, initially when we were talking about torquing moments, then the center of resistance was most incisely. So if the distance is 12 millimeters and the ratio is coming around more than 10 millimeters, more than 10, then the torquing moment will be achieved. So this is how the differences in the moment to force ratio brings about the alterations in the tooth movement. So if for bodily movement, the ratio will be between 8 to 10. So anything less than this, that is 1 to 7, then you have controlled tipping, and more than 10, then you have root movement or torquing. So the average for bodily movement is 8 to 10. Anything more than this will bring about root movement, whereas less than this, it will bring about the crown movement. So that is controlled tipping. So I hope this is very much clear to you. So please go through this chart again and again, because you can expect questions like this. They have asked similar questions previously, where they will give you a scenario where this much force is being given. So they will ask for they can ask you mathematically how much, at what distance should be the bracket should be positioned, so that we can achieve a bodily movement or controlled tipping. So you have to do the mental calculation and find out where the ratio will fall between 8 to 10. So what distance you should keep it. So all the other measurements they might give you, like the forces of 100 gram is given. Now at what distance this should be placed, so that there can be a bodily movement. So you have to do the mental calculations, and of the given options you have to correctly spell it out and find out what ratio. The ratio should be between 8 to 10. So mathematically whichever is correct, that you have to write. So I hope this is pretty much clear for you. So let's talk about anchorage. So anchorage is very important when you're planning the biomechanical considerations in treatment. Now according to Moyers, anchorage is the resistance to displacement. So to classify the anchorage according to the manner of the force, a force application, it is classified as simple anchorage, stationary anchorage, reciprocal anchorage, and reinforced anchorage. So let's talk about simple anchorage. So simple anchorage is characterized by the resistance offered by the anchorage tooth to tipping moment. So the resistance of the anchorage unit to tipping is utilized to move the another set of teeth is what explains the simple anchorage. So look at the picture on the right side where it is marked as simple anchorage, where a palatally placed premolar is being pushed buccally by utilizing the rest of the tooth as anchor tooth. So the number of the anchor tooth is greater than the number of the teeth to be moved. So this is the common example for a simple anchorage. Now, talking about stationary anchorage. So, stationary anchorage is defined as the dental anchorage in which the manner and application of the force that tends to displace the anchorage unit bodily in plane of space. So, in which the force is being applied. So, this is actually the resistance to bodily movement. The anchorage tooth is offering resistance to bodily movement, whereas simple anchorage was the resistance to tipping, whereas stationary anchorage, it is the resistance to bodily movement. So obviously this will be greater in magnitude than simple anchorage because it's against a bodily movement. Now, reciprocal anchorage is one in which two or more units of teeth are moving in opposite directions and they are pitted against each other by an appliances. So that gives you your reciprocal anchorage. The most common example is your closure of midline diastemas. Other examples are the use of crossbite elastics as well as dental arch expansion appliances. So here two units of tooth or two teeth which are moving in opposite directions, they will be pitted against each other and the anchorage is made use of each other's movement. Now, talking about reinforced anchorage. So, reinforced anchorage is one in which you reinforce the anchorage by adding non-dental anchorage sites. So, apart from the dental units, you in addition add some non-dental units into the anchorage site. For example, your mucosa, your muscles, your head posture. So, all these can be added into the anchorage unit so as to reinforce or re-emphasize your anchorage. A common example of such appliances are your upper inclined plane, sweat biplane and transpalatal arch or TPA. Now, another common classification of anchorage is intramaxillary and intermaxillary. So, intramaxillary is one in which all the anchorage units are established within the same jaw. So, if you are applying retraction or tipping in upper arch, the anchorage is derived from the dental unit within the upper arch. It is called as intramaxillary. So, if you are using retraction of the lower arch and the anchorage unit is derived from the lower arch itself, then it is an intramaxillary anchorage. So within the same jaw, the anchorage is established. Now what if you are using the anchorage units from the opposite arch? Then it becomes intermaxillary. So it is also called as Baker's anchorage, and the common example is your class 2 as well as class 3 elastics. So class 2 elastics, you are retracting your upper anteriors but the anchorage is derived from your lower molars. Whereas in class 3 elastics, you are retracting your lower anteriors but the anchorage is obtained from the upper molars. So this is a common example for intermaxillary elastics intermaxillary anchorage, and it is also called as Baker's anchorage. Now another classification of anchorage is intraoral and extraoral. So intraoral is one in which the anchorage is established within the mouth, whereas extraoral you derive the anchorage obtained outside the oral cavity. So this can be either from your cervical region as achieved by your neck straps, or can be from your occipital region as achieved through your headgears, cranial anchorage obtained by high pull headgears, and facial anchorage obtained by face mask. So intraoral anchorage is established within the mouth, whereas extraoral anchorage is obtained outside the oral cavity, and the common examples are cervical anchorage obtained through neck straps, occipital anchorage obtained by headgears, cranial anchorage achieved by high pull headgear, and facial anchorage obtained by face mask. So one of the unwanted things that can occur during an orthodontic treatment is your loss of anchorage, which can be defined as the unplanned or unexpected movement of the anchor teeth during orthodontic treatment. So some of the common causes of this loss of anchorage might be a poor appliance design, or might be a poor appliance adjustment, or a poor patient wear. So any of this can cause an anchorage loss. But what is important for us is, like, clinically, how would you recognize an anchorage loss, or how can you detect an anchorage loss? So there are two common clinical conditions which the anchorage loss is evident. One is when there is a mesial movement of your molars, like if it was already in class 1 molar relation, but once you started retracting your incisors after few appointments, you are seeing your class 1 is now becoming end on. then it is showing an anchorage loss. There is mesial movement of the molars, maybe upper or lower, and there might be proclination of the anteriors. So your incisors are not getting retracted, but rather there is proclination of their anteriors. Then both of these are clinical signs of a loss of anchorage. So in orthodontics, we have seen the few biomechanical considerations in orthodontics, like center of resistance, center of rotation, moment, couple, how you alter the moment and couple so as to bring about the desired tooth movement. Now it is also equally important that you understand the mechanical properties of the orthodontic materials that we are using, like your brackets, your arch wires, so as to achieve optimum orthodontic tooth movement. So these mechanical properties of these arch wires are equally important when you are applying a force for orthodontic tooth movement. So three important mechanical properties of an orthodontic arch wires are your strength, stiffness and range. So as to get a better understanding of these properties, we are looking at a typical force deflection curve of an elastic material like an orthodontic wire. Now please look at the picture and note that the stiffness of this material is given by the slope of the linear portion of the curve. So just before the curve is getting a curvature, the linear portion of the slope of the linear portion of the curves will give you the stiffness. And now the second one is your range. So range is along the distance, is the distance along the x-axis to the point at which permanent deformation occurs. So please look at that range is along the x-axis. It's the distance along the x-axis to the point at which permanent deformation occurs. So it's actually this point at which 0.1% permanent deformation occurs has been noted as yield point. So please look at the graph that it's like till the yield point the range is noted. So it's the distance along the x-axis and it's at the point at which permanent deformation occurs, and the yield point is the point at which 0.1% permanent deformation is occurring. Now clinically, one more thing that you have to notice here is that the spring back. So clinically, spring back occurs if the wire is deflected beyond the yield point. So if the wire is deflected beyond the yield point, there will be clinically useful spring back. That is, here it is loaded as point of arbitrary clinical loading. So that is the point at which clinically useful spring back occurs. So again, spring back is also given as a distance along the x-axis, and it's the point up to which the if the wire is deflected beyond the yield point, where it is getting deformed, but it is no longer returns to its original shape. So beyond yield point, permanent deformation is happening, but it will not break. And at the failure point is the point at which the wire is breaking. So please look at the graph. First we were discussing about stiffness, which is given as the slope on the linear portion of the curve. Now second we were discussing about the range. The range is the distance in the x-axis to the point at which permanent deformation is occurring, which is denoted as yield point. So yield point is the point at which 0.1% permanent deformation is occurring. And now then we were discussing about spring back. So spring back is again noted on your x-axis, and it is the clinically useful spring back occurs if the wire is deflected beyond the yield point, as denoted as the point to arbitrary clinical loading. And here the wire is getting deflected, but it no longer returns to its original shape. So that's the point at which which is denoted as the point of arbitrary clinical loading. Now the failure point is at which the wire breaks. Now please look at the graph on the right side. The second graph, it is actually representing the stress strain graphics of an elastic material, which is derived from a force deflection curve. So here also please note that there is a slope of the stress strain graph gives you the modulus of elasticity. So previously when you are discussing a force deflection curve, the slope of the linear portion was giving you the stiffness. Here in a stress strain graph, the slope is giving you modulus of elasticity. So the stiffness is actually directly proportional to your modulus of elasticity, because stiffness is also represented by the linear portion of your force deflection curve. So here in a stress strain graph, the slope is giving you the modulus of elasticity, to which your stiffness is directly proportional, whereas the springiness is indirectly proportional to your modulus of elasticity. So please note that the slope of a stress strain graph is giving you the modulus of elasticity, to which the stiffness is directly proportional and the springiness is inversely proportional. Now another correlation between strength, stiffness and range is that the strength is the product of stiffness and range. So strength is actually directly proportional to stiffness as well as range. And one more thing is that we have already seen that stiffness is directly proportional to modulus of elasticity, and springiness is also inversely proportional to modulus of elasticity, and also springiness is inversely proportional to stiffness. So stiffness and modulus of elasticity are directly proportional. So an increase in modulus of elasticity increases the stiffness of the material but reduces the springiness of the material. Also, if there is an increase in stiffness, there will be a decrease in springiness. They are inversely proportional. Now, two other characteristics of importance which can be illustrated in a stress strain diagram is resilience and formability. So please look at the graph. You can see that in a stress strain graph, resilience is the area under the stress strain curve out to the proportional limit. So it is actually representing the energy storage capacity of the wire, and it is actually a combination of the strength and the springiness. So resilience is the area under the stress strain curve out to the proportional limit. It represents the energy storage capacity of the wire, and it's a combination of the strength and springiness. Now the second measurement is your formability. So formability is the amount of permanent deformation that the wire can withstand before failing. So it's like, in other words, it represents the amount of permanent bending the wire will tolerate before it breaks. So it is again represented as the area under the stress strain curve, but beyond the proportional limit until the breaking point. So that is your formability. So formability is actually the amount of permanent bending the wire will tolerate before it breaks, whereas resilience is the energy storage capacity of your wire, and it is a combination of your strength and springiness. Now let's talk about how changing the diameter of your arch wire can bring about changes in the mechanical properties. So we are seeing the arch wires here. We can see there is a cantilever beam, a beam supported at both ends. Now whatever be the changing the diameter of a beam, no matter how it is supported, can greatly affect the properties. For example, first we will see the strength. So if the strength is actually directly proportional to the diameter of your arch wire, so if the diameter of the arch wire is doubled, then the strength is actually increasing as a cubic function of the diameter. So if the strength is initially the diameter is d, and if you are doubling it to 2d, then the strength is actually increases by 8 times. So the cubic function of the 2, that will give you 8 times increase in the strength. Whereas springiness is inversely proportional to your diameter of your wire, and it changes as a fourth power of the ratio. So if the diameter is increasing by 2 times, the springiness changes as the fourth power, and it is actually inversely proportional. So when the diameter increases by 2 times, the springiness is actually getting reduced by 1 by 16 times. So it is changing as a fourth power, and it is inversely proportional. Now the range is also changing when there is an doubling of the diameter. The range is actually getting reduced to half of it. So range is also getting reduced to 2, and it is inversely proportional. So when the diameter is getting doubled, the range is getting reduced to half. So this is how when the changes in the diameter of the arch wire, whether whatever be the nature of the beam, whether it is cantilever or supported at both ends, the normal pattern of change in the mechanical properties is that the strength actually increases when there is an increase in the diameter of the wire, and it is actually a cubic function. The springiness as well as range are inversely proportional to the changes in the diameter, and springiness is often expressed as a fourth power of the ratio. So please remember this mathematical formula, because they can ask you questions like that, like if the diameter of the wire is increased this much times, how much the strength will be affected, how much the springiness will get reduced, or how much. They can give you confusing options also. They might give you both, like springiness is getting increased, springiness is getting reduced. So first of all, you should know the springiness and diameter are inversely related, and to which power these are related. So springiness is the fourth power, strength is directly proportional and it is to your cubic power, and springiness is inversely proportional to your fourth power, and range is also inversely related to your diameter. So now let's talk about how either the change in the length of the beam or the way in which it is attached affects the properties. So first we will talk about the changes in the length of the beam. So please go through the picture. Initially you are seeing a cantilever beam with the length L, and now this in the second picture you are seeing the same cantilever beam with the length being doubled, that it is now 2L. Now we will see how the increase in length of the cantilever beam affects the properties. So doubling the length of the cantilever beam actually reduces the strength by half. Initially the strength was 1/2, now it has become 1/4. Whereas springiness and range is increasing. Springiness is increasing by 8 times and range is increasing by 4 times. So to generalize, when there is an increase in length of your cantilever beam, the strength is getting reduced by half of it. The strength is varying, and springiness varies. There is directly proportional, that is when the length increases, the springiness also increases as a cubic function, and range is increasing as a second power function. So please understand that whenever there is an increase in length of a beam, in short, if there is a increase in length of your archware attachments, then the strength is reducing. And springiness and range are both increasing. So springiness and range are directly proportional to the diameter of your the length of your cantilever beam. Springiness is directly proportional by your cubic function, and range is directly proportional by a second power function, whereas strength is inversely proportional to your length of the attachment. Now the second thing is how the way in which the beam is attached, whether it is single supported like a cantilever beam or whether it is supported at both ends. So how it affects the physical properties. Now, so look at the third picture. There you can see that it is a beam supported at both ends with a length as 2L. 2L is remaining the same as in the third as well as in the fourth picture. Now, if a beam is rigidly attached on both ends, then it will become more strong. So initially it was like lightly attached. Now in the last picture you can see that the beam is rigidly attached. So the strength is actually doubling. It was initially 1, now it has become 2. Whereas the springiness is getting reduced. The springiness is getting reduced by 1/4, and the elastic properties also is getting reduced to half. So the properties of an arch wire attachment is affected by whether it is tightly held or held loosely in a bracket. So if it is tightly held, then your strength is increasing, but the springiness and the range is getting reduced. Whereas when there is an increase in length of your beam, then the springiness and range are both increasing. Springiness to your cubic function and range is your second power function, whereas strength is getting reduced. But when the wires are attached rigidly, when they are attached rigidly to your brackets, then the strength is getting increased, but springiness and range are both getting reduced. So we have seen the mechanical properties of your elastic materials, especially your orthodontic arch wires. Now we will see about the composition and how the materials are influencing the composition of an arch wire. So the most commonly used orthodontic arch wire alloys are austenitic stainless steel, your cobalt chromium nickel alloys, and your beta titanium arch wires and nickel titanium arch wires. So austenitic stainless steel, it's also called as your 18-8 stainless steel, with the composition of 17 to 20 percentage chromium, 8 to 12 percentage nickel, and 0.15 percentage carbon, and balance mainly composed of iron. So it's a 18-8 stainless steel, 17 to 20 percentage chromium, and 8 to 12 percentage nickel. Now cobalt chromium nickel alloys, which are also known as your alloy wires, alloy blue color, cobalt chromium, the composition is 40 percentage cobalt, 20 percentage chromium, 15 percentage nickel, 15.8 percentage iron, 7 percentage molybdenum, 2 percentage manganese, 0.15 percentage carbon, and 0.04 percentage beryllium. So please note 40 percentage cobalt and 20 percentage chromium, 15 percentage nickel. Now coming to your beta titanium wires, which are also called as TMA wires. Here the titanium is composed of makes up around 77.8 percentage of your arch wire material, 11.3 percentage of molybdenum, then 6.6 percentage of zirconium, and 4.3 percentage of tin. Now, so beta titanium, the highest component is your titanium, obviously, so that is around 77 percentage, and then 11 percentage of molybdenum. Now nickel titanium wires, you have 55 percentage nickel and 45 percentage titanium. So beta titanium, it was 77 percentage titanium, whereas nickel titanium, it is just 45 percentage titanium and 55 percentage nickel. Now let's talk about the properties, why all these materials are being included in the arch wire composition. So if you're talking about stainless steel iron, then the major component is your chromium, 17 to 20 percentage is your chromium, and this is the chromium which provides resistance to tarnish and corrosion. So for chromium to provide resistance to tarnish and corrosion, minimum 12 to 13 percentage of chromium should be present in your arch wire. Now nickel, one of the drawbacks of your nickel is that it causes hypersensitivity. So most of the time we try to reduce the percentage of nickel in the arch wires. Now why carbon is included is that carbon increases the hardness of the material, so does cobalt. So cobalt and carbon both increases the hardness of the material, and titanium, the most desirable property of titanium is its biocompatibility. So let's talk about other major important points concerning arch wires. Cobalt chromium wires, which are also called as alloy arch wires, which was discovered in 1950. It is available in 4 tempers which are color coded, of which blue, yellow, green and red, of which blue is the soft one, yellow is the ductile one, green is the semi-resilient one, and red is your resilient one. So please specifically note that the blue is the soft alloy and red is the most resilient one. So blue, yellow, green and red. So blue forms the most soft alloy and red forms the most resilient alloy. Now talking about nickel titanium wires, which were discovered by Anderson and Hillman in 1971. And it was the nitinol. Nitinol was proposed by Buhler. Buhler has discovered nitinol, which is actually NITI Naval Ordnance Laboratory. So that's why the name nitinol. NITI Naval Ordnance Laboratory, where it is the place of its origin. And one of the most important properties of nitinol arch wires is that the shape memory and super elasticity. So when you are comparing the properties of the stainless steel, cobalt chromium, beta titanium and nickel titanium wires, Please note that the force delivery is the highest for your stainless steel and cobalt chromium. That is, your alloy and stainless steel wires are offering the maximum force delivery, whereas nickel titanium is most suitable for delivering light forces. So that is why nickel titanium is used in the initial alignment, leveling and alignment stages. We go for nickel titanium because it delivers light continuous forces. Whereas when you're moving to your retraction stages of your ortho treatment, you go for stainless steel as well as cobalt chromium alloys. Now talking about elastic range or spring back. So we have seen the springiness is actually inversely proportional to your modulus of elasticity. So the elastic range is the highest for your nickel titanium alloys. So nickel titanium alloy arch wire have the highest elastic range or spring back, whereas stainless steel and cobalt chromium will have the lowest elastic range or spring back. Now talking about formability, nickel titanium has very poor formability. You cannot bend that arch wire, nickel titanium wires into any loops or helices or anything. So nickel titanium is the one which has the poorest formability, whereas stainless steel, your alloy and beta titanium will have excellent formability. You can bend the arch wires to make loops, helices and everything. Now about soldering and welding, the only wire alloy that has true weldability is your beta titanium. So only arch wire alloy that has true weldability is your beta titanium, whereas nickel titanium can neither be soldered nor be welded. Whereas your stainless steel and your cobalt chromium alloys can be soldered, but welded joints must be reinforced with soldering. So the only arch wire alloy that has true weldability is your beta titanium, and the arch wire which can neither be soldered or nor be welded is your nickel titanium. And stainless steel as well as cobalt chromium can be soldered, but for welding you need your reinforcement with the solder. Now coming to arch wire bracket friction. So this friction is actually highest for your beta titanium, and nickel titanium is also equally offering more friction, but stainless steel and cobalt chromium alloys are offering less friction. So this arch wire bracket combination friction is highest for your beta titanium. Then the second comes nickel titanium, and stainless steel and cobalt chromium have least friction. And about biocompatibility concerns, it's the most biocompatible one is your beta titanium. The rest of the others are also offering concerns about biocompatibility because of the high content of nickel. The nickel is one component which causes hypersensitivity. So always try to compare and learn these properties, because you can give questions based on like the elastic range of the stainless steel is more than nickel titanium, is less than nickel titanium, is equivalent to nickel titanium, and they can give either of these two options correct. So you can expect questions like this. So always when you are learning about the physical properties of any material, try to make a chart like which is highest, which is lowest, and then try to compare it. Which of the properties of nickel titanium is of higher, or which is most desirable. So try to compare and learn the properties, so that will be much easier to memorize. Now coming to magnets in orthodontics. So the magnets in orthodontics was used to close the extraction spaces, and also for as an aid in eruption of your impacted tooth. So rare earth magnets have been used for these purposes, but one of the drawbacks of these magnets is that it is too bulky, and they actually obey the inverse square law. That is, the force changes as the square of the distance between the magnets also changes. So when the tooth are brought together, when you are trying to close the extraction spaces, as the tooth comes closer, the force actually changes. So we don't have a control of the force being delivered by the magnets. So that's one of the drawbacks of the magnets in orthodontics. And the commonly used ones are your rare earth magnets, and most commonly they are used for closure of extraction spaces as well as eruption of your impacted tooth. So that's all about biomechanical considerations in orthodontics. So basically you are learning about the major mechanical properties with regard to the force applied the moment, the couple, the center of resistance and center of rotation. Now about the mechanical properties through which of the materials of through which the force is being applied. So this includes your brackets, your arch wires, and the properties which we can alter so as to bring about changes in the force levels that has been applied to the orthodontics. So I once again I'm telling you people, once we're going through this chapter, please try to understand the concepts, not try to mug up everything, because once you get a clear idea about the concepts, it will be very easier for you to memorize it as well as to answer the questions. Please go through all the pictures that I have included in this. If you want further references, you can go through Profit. Please go through the pictures and the charts and try to understand it, because sometimes they can ask questions directly from that, or they can modify those pictures and ask you questions. So please understand why there is a moment created when the force is being applied. How do you alter it? What is a couple? How do you provide a counterbalancing moment? So please understand all these things and try to answer the questions. And once again, please go through the pictures and then try to read it, because since you are giving an online exam, whatever questions that you have seen in Dental Pulse, it's not going to come exactly like that. So they are going to put more pictures and ask you questions. So please go through the pictures and the diagrams. Please understand what's a cantilever beam, how the changes in the diameter and the length, and that brings about changes in the properties. Please learn the equations. The one thing that you have to learn by heart in this chapter is the change in the springness, strength and range. When there is a change in the diameter, the length, or the change in the mode of attachment of the beam, that you have to by heart by itself. So to which power all these materials are being changed. So please go through the questions. If there are any doubts, please don't hesitate to ask. All the best.